I Hate the News is the weekly news bulletin from I Hate Politics podcast, a show about a human activity we love to hate. I'm Sunil Dasgupta. It's February 4th, 2025. Uncertainty about what President Trump and his team, including Elon Musk, will do next causes fear and loathing in the DC region. Because state and local governments can't do much except wait for the other shoe to drop, their business, it seems, continues as usual. Maryland Senator Sarah Love and Delegate Julie Palakovich Carr join us to talk about their bill to prevent digital platform based rent setting collusion among landlords. The House of Delegates Judicial Proceedings Committee considers a bill to limit local district court commissioners from being able to issue charges and arrest warrants on their own. You will want to hear the backstory. There are several bills in the Assembly that look at one problem: cell phones in the classrooms. Howard County wrestles with the question, do smart watches count as a phone? And more. Stay with us.
I Hate Politics is brought to you by UMBC's Political Science Program. If your goal is to make a meaningful impact with a career in local, state, or federal government, discover what this degree can do for you. Learn more at shadygrove.umbc.edu.
I Hate Politics is a podcast about our neighborhoods, workplaces, schools and streets, and our local governments as they function in diverse and democratic societies. This means our politics are messy, dirty, sometimes corrupt, with often self-serving politicians. But no matter how much we may hate politics, we are never exempt from it, even when we refuse to participate. In fact, the purpose of politics is to keep society moving precisely when we don't agree with each other, like now. Music for this episode comes from the 1920s. Song recordings and films from a century ago just entered the public domain this January. First up, Tea for Two by the Benson Orchestra of Chicago. The big news may be the on-again, off-again tariffs. But here in the Washington, D.C. region, the future of federal workers and their agencies is urgent. Employees of USAID, the Agency for International Development, were told to stay home until further notice last weekend, while about 100 federal workers are said to have barred the door to prevent Elon Musk's data mining team into a sensitive government computer system. There seems to be a plan brewing to move student financial aid out of the Department of Education and into Treasury, while the Education Department is gutted. Work at NIH and other research institutions in suburban Washington, D.C. is at a standstill. In the shadow of the federal chaos, the area's local and state governments appear to be running business as usual. Political leaders speak about the coming calamity if federal funding on states were to be frozen. But there is so little they can actually do. The only thing they can is to try to keep their own house in order until something happens. Maryland receives $23 billion in federal funds every year. The state's own budget is $67 billion, so that's a real chunk of change. But it isn't exactly clear where the $23 billion from the federal government goes. Some of it goes to the state, but the feds also fund projects and programs directly. We think of this lack of clarity as a problem. But the decentralized character of the spending means that stopping it all will be a challenge. And any government that tries to do that has to use a really broad instrument that catches projects they don't want to stop, which then produces the possibility of a pullback or judicial action. Politically, the strategic response to the federal chaos would be to build internal consensus within jurisdictions, even if it comes at the cost of their own political orthodoxy. In Montgomery County, on the issue of housing affordability, for example, there has been a long running battle between economics and politics. The economics research, supply side housing advocates, and builders have all said that rent control or rent stabilization has an adverse impact on housing supply. Stands to reason. Price controls in any field operate the same way. But politically, those who rent have wanted relief now, and those who own and do not want additional housing density have supported rent control. Those looking through the lens of economics clearly see politics as detrimental to public welfare. But those who see the problem as the need to provide immediate relief to families, even if they also want to stop housing density, have a political understanding of the problem. These two perspectives have to be reconciled. But the economics versus policy standoff has gotten worse. Montgomery County blogger Adam Pagnucco has written about the building of apartments and the market in buying and selling of apartments in the county coming to a virtual stop as a result of rent stabilization. Jay Parsons, the chief economist for RealPage, the digital platform which, according to the attorneys general of Maryland and DC, enables rent-setting collusion between landlords, wrote on Twitter that rent control is the most effective NIMBY, or not in my backyard, policy. That is a policy not to build. Reporting from the National Multifamily Housing Council's conference recently, Parsons said that regulations on rent control, screening, and evictions means that developers are not taking projects in Montgomery County. A resolution to this standoff would strengthen state and local hands in the face of Trump's efforts to remake the federal government and the nation, but will require big compromises. I used to think it was possible for YIMBY, yes, in my backyard, housing advocates, and NIMBY, not in my backyard, rent control advocates, to strike a grand bargain. Rent control on one side and massive upzoning on the other. Last year, Maryland Governor Wes Moore's housing bills sought to move both sides, but in a limited way and without massive new financing of projects that are getting costlier. The actual impact of the bills is going to take time. No less than economics Nobel winner Darren Acemoglu has said that economics must take into account the impact of policy on political organization. Not only are those who oppose housing density organized and politically powerful, but they are allied with those who would benefit most from supply-driven stabilization of rents. Renters are not allied with landlords, or for that matter, RealPage, the digital platform that has been sued by DC and Maryland for enabling rent collusion among landlords. And now there is a bill in the Maryland Senate and the House that aims to ban platform-based rent coordination, a market that is dominated by RealPage, where Jay Parsons works. Here are the bill's sponsors, both Montgomery County legislators, Senator Sarah Love and Delegate Julie Palakovich-Carr.
So Senator Love and I have introduced legislation that really is trying to get at an issue that we've seen here in Maryland and across the country of landlords illegally colluding to drive up rent prices and vacancy rates among their apartment and rental units, really just to fuel their own profits. So what's at concern here is that there are AI-based technology where landlords are feeding in non-public, like competitive data that then is getting fed into this algorithm and shared with their competitors to help figure out really how far they can push the envelope in setting rents for their properties.
What is the extent of the problem?
So the Washington Post ran an article a couple of weeks ago with an interactive map, and there were a number in the state, and I counted 20 landlords in my district that are named in the suit. And a little while ago, the Biden administration released some research that showed, as a result of this mechanism, prices had gone up by about $112 per unit.
And I'll just point out statewide in the lawsuit that Attorney General Anthony Brown has filed here in Maryland, they identified more than 100,000 rental units in Maryland where the rents are being set through the use of this technology. RealPage definitely is the leading technology company in this space, but there are other products that work similarly in the market. I'll note that our legislation is not specific to RealPage. It really is just taking issue with the use of these AI-based algorithms in general.
Maryland Attorney General and the DC Attorney General have filed suit against RealPage and many landlords that use it. These lawsuits have been filed under current law. How is your law different?
Those lawsuits have been filed against specific parties under the antitrust laws. What this bill would do is look at the platform to look at the use of sharing non-public private proprietary data in order to set prices. So assuming these lawsuits went forward and RealPage and the landlords were found liable, the market will fill in the space that is left by RealPage moving out. So what we really want to get at is not any one specific company, but the use of this tactic, this sharing the non-proprietary data in order to set prices.
Data sharing between companies is allowed, but is not allowed for the purpose of price fixing. What you are doing by banning the platform or the use of the platform is to say that data sharing itself may not be allowed. Is that a correct interpretation?
I'd say not quite. So the bills takes issue specifically, as the senator mentioned, with the sharing of proprietary, non-public, competitive data. So RealPage, I'll note, in recent months has actually offered a new service on their platform where a landlord can still use the product, but only based off of their own company's holdings and not using competitors' data. That would be fine under this bill. I'll also note that there are other services that are available for property owners and property managers to use to help figure out kind of market trends that are based off of public data. For instance, like apartment listings and what current rents are going for based off of public data that anybody could look up. And that's also fine under this bill. So really, we just are taking issue with the provisions and basically the ability for folks to violate antitrust laws through sharing this non-public data.
Potentially, platform-based collusion is a much bigger issue. It would affect Amazon, which is a trading platform quite apart from being a seller itself. It could affect eBay. Certainly, Amazon provides pricing guidance to sellers on its platform. And sellers have complained that Amazon forces them to drop prices sometimes. What is the broad applicability of an approach that prevents algorithm-based price management?
For now, we are just looking at the housing market and the activities that are going on in Maryland and the effect that it has on our renters. We have a saying in Annapolis, which is, that sounds like an interesting bill for next year.
Maryland Delegate Julie Polakovich-Carr and Senator Sarah Love, thank you.
Thank you.
Maryland is one of the few states where a resident can walk into a district court, file a complaint against another person without providing evidence or even a police report. And the commissioner on duty in the court can issue an interim peace order and an arrest warrant. This happened 1 year ago in Montgomery County when local architect, baseball coach, kidney donor, and the satirist founder of the Tacoma Torch, Eric Saul, found the county sheriff outside his door in the middle of the night. The sheriff served Saul with a peace order and summons to appear based on a complaint of harassment filed with the district court commissioner by local podcaster and media personality Ryan Miner. Saul and Miner are both online loudmouths and were in a long Twitter fight. In their mutual insults, Saul had called Miner a misogynist shithead. Miner had been accused of harassment by women. But Saul said things did not go beyond online name-calling. Maryland law requires harassment to include physical proximity to the victim, and online harassment to include direct electronic communication. Saul said he neither knew nor directly communicated with Miner. But charges were filed, court dates set, lawyers hired. But before the date, Miner publicly apologized. The official complaint remained in place, however, and Saul paid out for lawyers and time. Miner did not appear at the court date, and the case was dismissed. Apparently, this kind of thing happens all the time in Maryland. False accusations without proof or vetting can be pressed into the judicial system, essentially abusing a method of responding to harassment to commit harassment itself. For several years now, the state's attorneys in Maryland have sought to minimize these frivolous and weaponized lawsuits. And last week, the Maryland House Judicial Proceedings Committee held a hearing on a bill to do that. Baltimore City State's Attorney Ivan Bates recalled the case of a local rapper, T.I., who had a similar complaint against him and was prevented from catching a flight. Here is Dawn Dalton, a mother whose son had to deal with false accusations.
My family endured 4.5 years of terror and trauma when my son was victimized simply because a young woman knew what we didn't, and that is that she could make false accusations repeatedly with the district court commissioner's office that was soon and that could potentially destroy my son without any real proof. She knew what we would soon learn, and that was that there would be no accountability for her actions, and she is not alone. Let me be very clear. This happens every day in the state of Maryland. This is absolutely a crime, in many cases a form of domestic violence. This tactic is also used against citizens over property, custody battles, and many other disputes as a weapon. As citizens and lawmakers, we must acknowledge the harm and correct this issue if we truly believe in justice. Many lives and families have been destroyed due to our current process. In fact, since we proposed these changes last year, we have been contacted by many families trying to obtain justice. Some families that were in this room with us last year to support us have now been impacted. If we had the proper screenings and accountability in place, they could have been spared from this unjust harm. We are simply asking for a more thorough and accountable system that will protect all Marylanders equally.
It's taken close to 20 years, but ever since the first iPhone was released in 2007, smartphones have become both an essential tool and a source of addiction. Schools in particular have wrestled with what to do. Some have sought to co-opt the device as an instructional tool. Others have insisted that children leave devices at home. The balance is now tilting towards limiting cell phone use in classrooms along a spectrum. Some will allow lunchtime use and others will allow only hallway use. Some teachers still like to use it in class and others ask you to surrender the phone. The big change is among parents who have gone from giving their children, sometimes elementary school children, smartphones to seeing them now as a hindrance to learning. The Maryland General Assembly is considering 4 bills in the House and 3 in the Senate to limit cell phone use. Why should there be so many, you might ask? Wouldn't it be better if all the bill sponsors simply got together and wrote a composite one? Well, here is a small but neglected civics lesson. There is no way to coordinate the actions of part-time legislators outside the time they are supposed to meet. So, a consolidated bill will be something that legislative committees construct by taking the bill text most likely to succeed and amending it with inputs from the others. Still no guarantee that it will pass, but now over to the Ways and Means Committee in the House and to EEE, Energy, Education, and Environment Committee in the Senate. Meanwhile, technology keeps racing on. Should smart watches be included? Howard County, which is going to ban cell phones from classrooms starting March 3rd, is wrestling with this question. Brian Bassett is the Director of Community and Engagement in Howard County Public Schools.
Ultimately, what it came down to was a couple things. One was the practical enforcement of eliminating or banning smartwatches and deciphering what's a smartwatch, what's a digital watch, what's an activity tracker, those kind of things. And school staff, they didn't feel confident yet to be able to do that. The second thing was the school staff that were part of the work group indicated that at this point in time, smartwatches generally weren't a concern. They weren't having a lot of issues with smartwatches. I won't sit here and say there were none, but they were hesitant to try to correct a problem that didn't yet exist. But at the same time, let's leverage the time in the remainder of the semester, the second semester, to be able to monitor that, because if all other personal devices are the use of those are reduced or eliminated, then perhaps smartwatches would become a concern. But then we would know more about that concern and be able to address that.
We end today with a bon voyage to Josh Kurtz, the founder-editor of Maryland Matters, a new media outlet with really old journalism values of fact-checking, everyday reporting, and impeccable judgment. Josh was kind enough to appear on the show a few times. Thank you. He's looking forward to gazing at the Pacific, a figurative goal we can all aspire to. Happy travels, Josh. That's all for this episode. Be sure to check out our feature interview series that come out Friday mornings. I Hate Politics is produced by me, Sunil Dasgupta, with support from University of Maryland, Baltimore County. I direct UMBC's political science program at the universities at Shady Grove in Montgomery County, where, among other things, we explore and learn about politics, government, and society close to home. Music for this episode comes from the newly in public domain tunes from the 1920s. We heard the Paul Whiteman Band, their work, I Will See You in My Dreams, and Carl Fenton's Limehouse Blues. Those were within the episode. And now we go out with Jan Garber with the number I Want to Be Happy. Who can argue with that? Usually we feature local music on the show. If you want to share your music on the podcast or know someone else who might want to, please email us at producer@ihppod.org. See you next time.